6 a.m. Another day begins with empty hallways and the quiet hum of computers. 60 hours a week, month after month, believing hard work would be rewarded. Then the paycheck arrives, not a cent of overtime. "You're salaried, forgot that detail?" He laughs in my face. That's when something breaks inside me. Not my spirit, but my willingness to be exploited. They calculated their theft, over $4 million, stolen from 100 employees. They never expected anyone to fight back. They never expected me to keep receipts. Sometimes justice isn't about revenge. It's about making the numbers add up. 6 a.m. The office building stood empty except for me and the night security guard exchanging nods as our shifts crossed. My footsteps echoed through the vacant hallways of TechVantage's Austin headquarters. I'd press the elevator button, ride up 14 floors, and be the first to switch on the lights. Every single day my desk faced east. I'd watch the sun climb over the city skyline while answering emails from our European clients. By the time others arrived at 9, I'd already cleared half my daily workload. "You're a machine, Jacob," Mike would say, clapping my shoulder as he walked by with his artisan coffee. "That's why I hired you." I believed him. I believed in the company, too. We were building something revolutionary, software that could predict supply chain disruptions before they happened. In a post-pandemic world, this wasn't just profitable. It felt important, like we were preventing future disasters. The official workday ended at 5, but I'd stay until midnight or later. The blue light of my monitor burned my retinas as I refined algorithms, fixed bugs, responded to urgent client requests. My apartment became a place I visited briefly to shower and change clothes. "This is how careers are made," Mike would say during our weekly one-on-ones. I started exactly like you, putting in the hours, making sacrifices. Now look where I am, where he was, director of engineering with stock options, a Tesla, and a house in Westlake. Where I wanted to be. We're tracking every hour, right? I asked one evening, 6 months into my role. We were alone in the office. Even the cleaning crew had gone home. Mike didn't look up from his phone. Of course. The system logs everything. All those overtime hours are gold in this industry. I nodded and returned to my code. I believed him until I didn't. The pay stub appeared in my inbox with a cheerful automated message. "Thank you for your contribution to TechVantage." I stared at the numbers, blinking, certain there was a mistake. The figure matched my base salary exactly. No overtime. Nothing for the additional 30 hours every week. Nothing for the nights, weekends, holidays. My hands trembled as I printed the document. I walked to the break room, made a cup of coffee I didn't want, and tried to calm my racing thoughts. Maybe accounting made an error. Maybe there was a delay in processing overtime. Later that evening, when the office had emptied again, I knocked on Mike's door. He was still there, of course. "We were always the last two. Got a minute?" I asked, for my star employee. "Always." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. I placed the pay stub between us. "There seems to be an issue with my compensation. The overtime hours aren't reflected." His smile didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A slight narrowing, a hardening. "Jacob," he said, voice gentle as if explaining to a child, "you're salaried, exempt. We don't pay overtime for your position." My chest tightened. "But my contract specifically states, I'm not HR, but I'm pretty sure you're misinterpreting something." He slid the paper back toward me. "Look, everyone puts in extra hours here. It's the culture. It's how we compete with the giants." "I understand the culture, Mike, but legally," he interrupted, "you're an exempt employee." End of story. His smile returned, wider now, showing teeth. "This isn't McDonald's. We don't punch time cards. You said the system tracks hours. You said they were being logged." Mike leaned back, studying me. Then he laughed. Actually laughed in my face. "For project management purposes, sure. Not for compensation. You're salaried, Jacob. You signed the contract. Forgot that detail?" I hadn't forgotten anything. I'd read every line of my employment agreement before signing. My position, software engineer 2, qualified for overtime under Texas labor laws. I knew this. Mike knew this. But sitting there, watching him dismiss me with such casual confidence, I felt a flash of doubt. Had I misunderstood something fundamental about my employment? Was I the one who was wrong? Look, Mike said, softening his tone, I see your potential. Keep performing like you have been, and there's a promotion coming. Senior engineer, better base, bigger bonuses. Just trust the process. I nodded, gathered my pay stub, and left his office. But something had shifted inside me. A small hot coal of anger had been planted. And despite Mike's dismissal, I knew what I'd read in my contract. I knew I was right. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, contract documents spread across my dining table. There it was in black and white, non-exempt status under FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act. I wasn't imagining things. I calculated the unpaid wages in my head. 6 months of 30 extra hours weekly at time and a half. The number made me dizzy. Over $20,000 they'd stolen from me. My phone buzzed. A text from Mike. Early meeting tomorrow with the CEO. Be there at 5:30. I stared at the message, feeling something twist in my stomach. 5:30 in the morning, without overtime pay, without acknowledgement, without respect. For the first time since I'd started at TechVantage, I didn't immediately respond with "we'll be there." Instead, I set my phone down and continued reading through my employment documents. By dawn, my eyes were red and my mind was made up. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, about truth, about justice. The hot coal in my chest had grown into a steady flame. I showered, dressed, and drove to the office. I arrived at 5:35. Mike glanced at his watch when I walked into the conference room. "You're late." The CEO nodded at me but didn't look up from his laptop. There were dark circles under his eyes. "Traffic," I lied. A small act of rebellion. The meeting lasted 2 hours. I took notes, made suggestions, answered technical questions, performed as expected. But inside I was different. Every minute we ran over normal business hours, I mentally added to the tally of what they owed me, what they were taking from me. After the CEO left, Mike lingered. "Everything okay?" "You seem off today," I met his gaze directly. "Just tired. We're all tired," he said with a chuckle. "But we're changing the world, right?" I nodded. Right, but I didn't believe it anymore. We weren't changing the world. We were just making rich men richer, and I was done letting them profit from my exploitation. The labor attorney's office was in an old converted house in South Austin. Nothing fancy, no marble floors or leather furniture like the downtown firms. Just worn wooden floors, practical desks, and walls lined with books. Diana Rodriguez didn't look like the lawyers in TV shows either. No power suit or slicked back hair. She wore jeans, a blazer, and an expression of focused intensity that made me feel instantly that I'd come to the right place. "So you've been working 60-plus hours weekly for 6 months with no overtime compensation," she summarized. After I explained my situation, I nodded, sliding my folder across her desk. Inside, my contract, pay stubs, email records, and a spreadsheet documenting my hours. "I've been tracking my time since the beginning," I explained. I knew we worked long hours in tech, but I also knew I wasn't classified as exempt. She raised an eyebrow, impressed. "Most people don't pay attention to these details until there's a problem." "My father was a union electrician," I said. "He taught me to know my rights." Diana opened the folder and began examining my documents. "This is good," she murmured. "Very good. So I have a case?" She looked up. "You have more than a case, Mr. Foster. Based on what I'm seeing, you have a slam dunk. Texas follows federal FLSA guidelines for overtime. If you're correctly classified as non-exempt, they owe you for every hour over 40 each week, at time and a half." Relief washed over me, followed quickly by anxiety. "What happens now? Will I lose my job?" "Legally, they cannot fire you for asserting your labor rights. That would be retaliation, which gives us another case." She leaned forward. "But practically speaking, yes, your work environment will likely become uncomfortable. Companies don't like being called out on their illegal practices." I swallowed hard. "I figured as much. Are you prepared for that possibility?" The question hung in the air between us. Was I ready to risk my career, my income, my professional reputation? The tech industry was smaller than it seemed. Word got around, but then I thought of Mike's laugh. His dismissive wave. "You're salaried, forgot that detail?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm prepared," Diana nodded, satisfied. "My retainer is $3,000. That covers the initial filing and preliminary work. If we go to trial, costs will increase, $3,000. Almost all my savings. I'd been putting money aside for a down payment on a condo, planning to finally stop renting. Another dream deferred. I understand, I said, pulling out my checkbook. As I wrote the check, Diana studied me. Most people give up, you know. They accept the exploitation because fighting seems too hard, too expensive, too risky. I handed her the check, meeting her gaze. I'm not most people. No, she said, taking it. You're clearly not. That evening I worked late again. But everything felt different. Each keystroke, each email, each line of code was evidence. Documentation, ammunition. I was no longer just working. I was building my case. The lawsuit notification arrived on Mike's desk on a Tuesday morning. I know this because I watched the mail clerk deliver it. I watched Mike's face as he opened the envelope. Watched his expression change from confusion to shock to fury in the span of seconds. His eyes shot up, finding me across the open office floor. I didn't look away, didn't flinch, just held his gaze steadily until he was the one who broke contact. By noon, I'd been called to HR. The representative, a woman I'd seen but never spoken to, sat behind a desk with my file open in front of her. Jacob, she began, voice professionally neutral. We've received notice of a lawsuit filed by you against the company regarding overtime compensation. I nodded. That's correct. I want to understand your perspective on this matter. It was a trap. Anything I said could be used against me later. Diana had prepared me for this. With respect, I replied. I've outlined my position clearly in the legal filing. My attorney has advised me not to discuss the details outside proper legal channels. Her professional smile faltered slightly. We'd like to resolve this internally if possible. There may have been a misunderstanding about your classification. There's no misunderstanding. My contract clearly states I'm non-exempt under FLSA. Sometimes contractual language can be confusing. It isn't confusing, I interrupted. It's explicit. I'm entitled to overtime pay for hours worked beyond 40 per week. I haven't received that compensation. It's quite straightforward. She closed my file with a sigh. This approach is rather adversarial, Jacob. We're a family here at TechVantage. The statement was so absurd I almost laughed. Families don't steal from each other. Her expression hardened. I hope you understand that legal proceedings can be lengthy and unpleasant for all parties. I'm prepared for that reality. And you should know that while your employment is protected during this process, many find that the workplace atmosphere becomes uncomfortable. There it was. The veiled threat. Are you suggesting the company will allow retaliatory behavior? I asked, holding her gaze. Because that would certainly strengthen my case. She flushed slightly. Of course not. I'm merely observing that interpersonal dynamics can become strained in these situations. I appreciate your concern, I said, standing. Is there anything else? Not at this time. As I left the HR office, I felt strangely calm. The die was cast. There was no going back now. Only forward, through whatever came next, and plenty came next. The isolation began immediately. Subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. My regular one-on-ones with Mike were canceled. Too busy, his assistant explained. Meetings I'd previously been crucial to suddenly happened without me. My input wasn't requested on projects I'd helped build from the ground up. In the break room, conversation stopped when I entered. Lunch invitations dried up. People I'd considered friends became politely distant, their eyes sliding away when I approached. I understood their fear. They didn't want to be associated with the troublemaker, the boat rocker, the lawsuit guy. Mike's strategy was more direct. He began questioning my work publicly, finding minor issues to criticize during team meetings. Jacob, these module dependencies aren't optimized. This is basic stuff. Or, is this really the best implementation approach? Seems inefficient, valid technical critiques perhaps, but delivered with a new edge. A public undermining of my competence. I documented every instance. Every meeting I was excluded from. Every email left unanswered. Every criticism that crossed from professional to personal. Diana had told me to keep meticulous records, and I did. The hardest part was the comments. Not said to my face, but deliberately within earshot. Some people just don't understand how this industry works. Ungrateful, after everything the company's invested in him. If you don't want to work hard, Why go into tech? Each barb landed exactly as intended. Made me question myself, my choices, my right to fair treatment. Made me wonder if I was the problem. 4 weeks in, Mike cornered me in the kitchen while I was making coffee. "You know, you can still withdraw the lawsuit," he said, voice low. We could forget this happened. Get things back to normal. I stirred my coffee slowly. And my overtime? We could discuss a one-time bonus. As a gesture of goodwill. The law requires time and a half for every hour over 40. For every affected employee, not just me. That's not negotiable. His friendly facade dropped. You're making a mistake, Jacob. This industry runs on relationships. On trust, on people knowing you're a team player. I met his gaze. Does it run on wage theft too? His jaw tightened. You've changed. No, Mike. I've just stopped believing the lies. He shook his head in disgust and walked away. That night, working late despite everything, old habits die hard, I received a company-wide email announcing a new Employee Appreciation Happy Hour scheduled for Friday. The time? 6:30 p.m., the unwritten message. After hours, the expectation. Attendance without compensation. The irony? Palpable. I saved the email to my evidence folder and continued working. 3 months into the lawsuit, doubt began to creep in. Not about whether I was right, I knew I was, but about whether being right was worth it. Worth the stress, the isolation, the career damage. My performance review came back with a meets expectations rating. After consistently receiving exceeds expectations since my hiring, the message was clear. My prospects at TechVantage were dead. Diana warned me the discovery process would be lengthy. Documents requested, produced, reviewed. Depositions scheduled, postponed, rescheduled. Corporate legal teams excelled at delays. Meanwhile, I lived in limbo. Too principled to quit. Too stubborn to withdraw the suit. Too invested to walk away. I started having trouble sleeping. Would wake at 3 a.m. with my heart racing, replaying conversations, imagining worst-case scenarios. What if we lost? What if I'd misunderstood some technical aspect of labor law? What if Mike was right and I'd torpedoed my career for nothing? On a particularly bad night, I drove to the office at 2 a.m. Not to work, just to sit in the parking lot and stare at the building where I'd poured so much of myself. The windows were dark except for the top floor, where a cleaning crew moved from room to room. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Not too late to drop this. Think about your future. I stared at the screen, a chill running through me. Was it Mike? Someone else from the company? I took a screenshot and forwarded it to Diana, adding it to my growing file of evidence. The next day was Saturday, but I went hiking in the Greenbelt instead of working. The physical exertion helped clear my head. Sitting on a limestone outcrop, watching kayakers navigate the creek below, I called my father. "They're trying to wait you out," he said after I explained where things stood. It's a classic tactic. Make the process so painful you give up before reaching a resolution. It's working, I admitted. I'm exhausted, Dad. That's the point. But remember what's at stake here. Not just your back pay. This is about dignity, about every worker who comes after you. I watched a blue heron stalk fish in the shallows, patient, focused, undeterred. When I was your age, my father continued, I reported unsafe conditions at a construction site. Got blackballed for 2 years. Couldn't find work anywhere. Your mother thought I'd lost my mind, fighting a battle that big. What happened? 3 months after I filed the complaint, a crane collapsed at another site run by the same company. Killed 2 men. Would have been our crew if I hadn't spoken up. He paused. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you. Sometimes it saves lives. You never really know. I let his words sink in. My situation wasn't life or death, but the principle was the same. If companies could violate labor laws without consequences, they would continue exploiting workers. Someone had to say enough. Thanks, Dad, I said finally. You've got this, son. Stubbornness runs in our family. When I returned home, I found an email from Diana. Need to speak urgently. Call me! My stomach dropped. Bad news traveled fast, came on weekends, required urgent calls. I dialed her number with shaking fingers. Jacob, she answered immediately. We've had a breakthrough. Diana's office on Sunday afternoon. The same worn furniture, the same book-lined walls, but the energy was entirely different. She practically vibrated with excitement as she slid a folder across her desk. "Discovery has been productive," she said, understating dramatically. I opened the folder and found printouts of emails. Dozens of them. Internal company communications that had been surrendered during the legal discovery process. "Read the highlighted sections," Diana prompted, unable to contain her smile. The first email was from Mike to the CFO. "Dated 2 months before I filed my lawsuit. HR is concerned about our overtime practices for software engineers de Burhar. They're technically non-exempt under FLSA, but we've been treating them as exempt. Potential liability is significant." The CFO's response, "Same day. What's the actual exposure here?" "Figure?" Mike again. Rough calc. 24 engineers, ex-AVG 20 hours overtime weekly. Ex-52 weeks. Ex-AVG 50 a la HR at TIM. Ian half, so 187 met annually. Been operating this way for 3+ years, CFO. Christ, options? Mike, 1. Reclassify correctly and start paying OT2. Adjust job descriptions to qualify for exemption. Continue current practice and hope nobody notices. CFO, option 3 for now. These employees are too focused on advancing their careers to check labor classifications. If someone complains, we'll deal with it individually. I looked up at Diana, stunned. They knew. They calculated the theft. Keep reading, she urged. I turned to the next set of emails, dated 1 week after I confronted Mike about my missing overtime. Mike to HR Director. Foster asked about overtime. I deflected, but he seemed unsatisfied. He's smart, might look into it further. HR Director. If he pushes, offer a spot bonus to keep him happy. Cheaper than opening this can of worms company-wide. And finally, the smoking gun. An email from Mike to the CFO sent the day after I filed my lawsuit. "We have a problem." Foster filed an OT lawsuit. He has documentation of hours worked. His contract explicitly states non-exempt status. Our exposure is significant, not just with him, but potentially all Eng2 hours if this becomes known. CFO, can we terminate him? Legal Department, CCD, absolutely not. That's retaliation and would exponentially increase our liability. We need to assess settlement options immediately. Mike, in the meantime, I'll ensure his work experience discourages others from following his example. Keep cutting the overtime, they won't do anything anyway. I sat back, a strange mix of vindication and rage washing over me. I'd been right all along. They'd known they were breaking the law, had calculated the theft, had deliberately continued stealing wages because they thought employees were too focused on advancing their careers to notice. This is, I searched for words, a slam dunk. Diana finished for me. Their own internal communications admit knowing violation of labor laws, intentional misclassification, and deliberate retaliation. The only question now is how much they'll pay to make this go away. And if I don't want it to go away, the question surprised even me as it left my mouth. Diana studied me. What do you mean? What if I want this to be public? What if I want every engineer at that company to know they're being stolen from? That's unusual. Most clients want the largest settlement possible, which typically comes with a confidentiality agreement. I nodded, understanding the implication. Silence could be purchased, and the price was usually high. Let me think about it, I said. She closed the folder, her expression serious now. We're scheduled to depose Mike next week. Given these emails, it should be illuminating. I left her office with copies of the emails, evidence, proof, vindication. That night I slept better than I had in months. The truth has that effect sometimes. Preparation for Mike's deposition consumed the next week. Diana and I spent hours reviewing the email evidence, my documentation of hours worked, and the retaliation I'd experienced. We anticipated defenses, practiced questions and responses, built a narrative that connected all the dots. Remember, Diana advised, depositions aren't just about extracting information. They're psychological. Mike knows we have these emails. He knows he's cornered, but he'll still try to minimize, deflect, explain away. How do I handle that? You don't, I do, she smiled. You just sit there and watch him squirm. Your presence alone will be powerful. The human face of his exploitation. At work, the atmosphere had shifted again. The active hostility had given way to something more unsettling, a nervous avoidance. Senior management suddenly disappeared from view. Mike canceled all his in-person meetings, citing a strategic planning sprint. The CFO took an unexpected vacation. They knew what was coming. My colleagues sensed the change too. The whispers behind my back acquired a different tone. Less contemptuous, more curious. A few brave souls approached me cautiously. "Is it true you're suing over overtime?" I asked Priya, a fellow software engineer too, who'd started 3 months after me. I was careful. "I can't discuss specifics of an ongoing legal matter, but it is about overtime?" she pressed. "Because I've been working 60-hour weeks since I started. Never seen a dime beyond my base." I studied her, weighing my response. "You might want to review your contract. Check your FLSA classification." Her eyes widened slightly. "And if it says non-exempt? Then I'd suggest consulting with a labor attorney." Hypothetically speaking, she nodded slowly. "Hypothetically, could I get the name of yours?" I wrote Diana's contact information on a post-it. As I handed it to her, I noticed others watching our exchange from across the room. The ripples were beginning. The day before the deposition, I received another message from the unknown number. "Last chance. Drop this and we can talk about SVP Fast Track, SVP, Senior Vice President." A dangling carrot. A bribe wrapped in opportunity. I forwarded the message to Diana without responding and packed my bag for the day. As I walked to the elevator, I passed Mike's darkened office. The light from my phone illuminated his empty chair, his cluttered desk, the meaningless motivational poster on his wall. "Innovation demands sacrifice." I took a picture of it. A strange impulse I didn't fully understand until later. A record of the lies we tell to justify exploitation. A reminder of what I was really fighting against. That night, I prepared my suit for the deposition, pressed my shirt, polished my shoes. Small rituals that helped focus my mind. Tomorrow would change everything. I could feel it, and for the first time in months, the feeling wasn't dread, it was anticipation. The deposition took place in a beige conference room at a downtown law firm. Neutral territory. The table was too large for the number of people present, creating an artificial distance between participants. Mike arrived with 2 attorneys, a gray-haired man who exuded expensive confidence, and a younger woman who never looked up from her legal pad. TechVantage's legal firepower. I sat beside Diana, wearing my only suit, feeling simultaneously overdressed and underprepared. A court reporter set up her stenography machine. A video camera recorded from the corner. Mike wouldn't meet my eyes. His face was pale, his typical swagger replaced by a careful stillness. He smoothed his tie repeatedly, a nervous tick I'd never seen before. The formal preliminaries passed in a blur. Oaths sworn. Procedures explained. Ground rules established. Then Diana began. "Mr. Harrington, please state your position at TechVantage." Mike leaned toward the microphone. "Director of Engineering. And in this role, you supervise how many employees?" "Currently 43, including my client, Jacob Foster." "Yes." "How would you describe Mr. Foster's performance during his employment?" Mike shifted. "Satisfactory. Just satisfactory?"
"No written or verbal evaluations indicating excellent performance?"
"He met expectations." Diana smiled slightly. "Let's review his performance evaluations, shall we?" She slid documents across the table. Copies of my quarterly reviews, all showing exceeds expectations ratings, some with Mike's handwritten comments like outstanding contributor and top-tier talent. "Do these refresh your recollection, Mr. Harrington?" Mike glanced at the papers, then at his attorney, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Yes," Mike conceded. "Jacob performed well. Well enough to work 60-plus-hour weeks consistently. We have demanding delivery schedules. Everyone works long hours, but not everyone is classified as non-exempt under FLSA, correct?" Mike's attorney interjected. "Objection. Calls for a legal conclusion." Diana pushed forward. "Let me rephrase. Are you familiar with the employment classifications at TechVantage, generally speaking? And you're aware that software engineers levels 2 through 4 are classified as non-exempt in their employment contracts?" Mike's jaw tightened. "I believe HR handles those details. But you're copied on all offer letters for your direct reports, correct?" "Yes." "So you would have seen Mr. Foster's classification when he was hired?" Possibly. I don't recall specifically. Diana nodded as if this was an expected answer. She opened another folder. I'd like to refer to Exhibit C, an email from you to the CFO dated January 15th. She slid the document forward. Could you read the highlighted section for the record? Mike stared at the paper. His right hand trembled slightly. Mr. Harrington? Diana prompted. HR is concerned about our overtime practices for software engineers, the IQ. They're technically non-exempt under FLSA, but we've been treating them as exempt. Potential liability is significant. You wrote this email? Yes. So you were aware that software engineers 2-4, including Mr. Foster, were non-exempt and legally entitled to overtime pay? Mike looked at his attorney again, who whispered something to him. Yes, he finally admitted. I was aware. The deposition continued for 4 more hours. Email by email, Diana reconstructed the deliberate decision to withhold legally mandated overtime, the calculation of stolen wages, the strategy to discourage complaints. Mike alternated between technical evasions and reluctant admissions. But as the evidence mounted, his composure crumbled. Breaking point came when Diana presented the email about ensuring my work experience discourages others from following my example. Would you describe the actions you took following Mr. Foster's lawsuit as retaliatory, Mr. Harrington? Mike's attorney interjected. Objection. Argumentative? I'll rephrase, Diana said smoothly. After Mr. Foster filed his lawsuit, did you exclude him from meetings he previously attended? Sweat beaded on Mike's forehead. There may have been some restructuring of team communications. Did you cancel your one-on-one meetings with him? I had scheduling conflicts. Did you criticize his work publicly in ways you hadn't before? I provide feedback to all my reports. Did you state, and I quote, I'll ensure his work experience discourages others from following his example? Mike stared at the email in front of him. His hand reached for his water glass but knocked it over instead, sending water across the table. As papers were hurriedly moved and tissues distributed, I watched him. His face had lost all color. His breathing was shallow. His eyes darted between his attorneys like a cornered animal. In that moment, I felt no satisfaction. No vindication. Just a profound sadness at how easily principles are abandoned for profit. How readily people inflict harm when systems reward it. When the deposition resumed, Mike's voice had changed. Quieter, defeated. Yes, he said. I wrote that. No further questions, Diana concluded. As we packed up our materials, Mike's senior attorney approached Diana. They spoke in hushed tones at the far end of the room. They want to discuss settlement terms, Diana informed me as we left. Urgently. How urgent? They've offered to meet tomorrow morning. That's practically light speed in legal terms. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street. Traffic flowed around us, people hurrying home from work. What happens now? I asked. Diana smiled. Now? Now we name our price. The settlement offer came in at $86,000, my unpaid overtime plus interest, but no punitive damages. It's a starting point, Diana explained. They're testing how badly you want this resolved. Counter? I suggest $150,000. Your overtime plus punitive damages for the willful nature of the violation and the retaliation you experienced. The next day, their counter, $100,000, Diana. They're moving quickly. That's telling. Counter with $140,000 in mandatory overtime compliance. Training for all managers. Their response, $110,000 in consideration of training. This dance continued for a week. Offers and counters. Terms and conditions. A choreographed negotiation with my life and principles as the stakes. The final settlement, $127,000 and mandatory compliance training. More than I'd expected, less than I deserved, but enough to feel like justice had been approximated. If not perfectly served, I signed the papers in Diana's office. My signature a final punctuation mark on a chapter I was ready to close. Congratulations, Diana said, shaking my hand. You stood your ground. Not many do. Thank you. For everything. Just doing my job, she smiled. The check will take a few weeks to process. Then this is officially behind you, but it wasn't behind me. Not yet. 2 days later, an envelope arrived at my apartment. No return address, just my name typed on the front. Inside, a thumb drive and a handwritten note. Thought you should have this. You're not the only one. I plugged the drive into my computer, scanning it for viruses before opening its contents. What I found made my blood run cold. Spreadsheets, dozens of them. Detailed accounting of unpaid overtime for every non-exempt employee at TechVantage for the past 4 years. Names, hours, amounts, organized by department, by manager, by quarter. The total at the bottom of the master sheet, $4,227,591, $4 million in stolen wages. Over 100 employees affected. I recognized the formatting, the analytical approach. This was the work of someone in finance, someone with access to the raw data, someone who'd been silently documenting the theft. I called Diana immediately. I have evidence that my case isn't isolated, that this is company-wide wage theft affecting over 100 employees. She was quiet for a moment. Jacob, your settlement includes a confidentiality agreement. You can't disclose— I haven't signed it yet, I interrupted. The final papers are still being drawn up. Another pause. What exactly are you suggesting? I don't know yet. But this isn't just about me anymore. I spent that night reviewing the files, verifying the calculations, confirming what I already knew to be true. TechVantage had built its profit margins partly on systematic wage theft. My case wasn't an oversight or an isolated incident. It was the tip of an iceberg. The next morning, my phone rang. Unknown number, but a familiar voice. Mr. Foster. This is Arthur Kellerman, General Counsel for TechVantage, the company's top lawyer, calling me directly. Unprecedented. Mr. Kellerman, what can I do for you? I understand you haven't signed the final settlement documents yet. That's correct. They're still being prepared. We'd like to revise our offer. The board has authorized me to increase the settlement to $250,000, nearly double the agreed amount. A red flag. That's generous, I said carefully. May I ask what prompted this revision? Simply a desire to resolve this matter amicably and recognize your patience throughout this process. I didn't believe him for a second. They knew about the leaked files. Somehow they knew. I appreciate the offer, I said. I'll discuss it with my attorney. We'd appreciate a prompt response. The revised papers can be ready this afternoon. His urgency confirmed my suspicion. They were panicking. One more thing, he added, his tone deliberately casual. The revised agreement includes enhanced confidentiality provisions. Standard procedure for settlements of this size. Of course it did. They weren't paying for my overtime. They were paying for my silence. I'll let you know my decision by end of day, I promised. I called Diana immediately after hanging up. She was stunned by the increased offer. They're running scared, she concluded. Question is, what do you want to do about it? That was the million-dollar question. Or rather, the $4 million question. Take the money and walk away. Or push for systemic change? My father's words echoed in my mind. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you. I made my decision. I declined the $250,000, not immediately. Not impulsively. I took hours to consider what it meant, what it would buy, what it would cost. $250,000 would eliminate my student loans, would make a down payment on a house possible, would create a financial cushion I'd never had, but it would also buy my silence, would bury the larger truth, would abandon 100 colleagues to continued exploitation. I called Arthur Kellerman at exactly 5 p.m. I've considered your revised offer, I told him. And? His voice was eager, relieved. He thought it was done. I'm declining. Silence on the line. Then, I don't think you understand the generosity of this offer. Mr. Foster, I understand exactly what you're buying. Mr. Kellerman, my silence about the company-wide wage theft affecting over 100 employees. Another silence. Longer this time. I don't know what you're referring to. I think you do. $4,027,591 in unpaid overtime over 4 years. Documented meticulously by quarter, department, and manager. His breath caught audibly. Where did you— That's not important. What matters is that I'm not signing any confidentiality agreement. I'll accept the original settlement amount for my individual damages. But I want a public acknowledgement of the violation and a commitment to pay all affected employees their back wages. That's completely unreasonable. The board would never. Then I'll file a class action lawsuit instead. With over 100 potential plaintiffs and documented evidence of willful violation, I imagine that would be significantly more expensive. Not to mention the PR damage. You're making a mistake, Foster. No, Mr. Kellerman. TechVantage made the mistake. I'm just refusing to help cover it up. I hung up before he could respond. Within an hour, Diana called. What the hell did you say to Kellerman? I just got the most bizarre call from their litigation team. I explained my position. Jesus, Jacob. She sounded somewhere between impressed and terrified. You're playing hardball with $1 billion company. They stole from their workers. Deliberately. Systematically. Someone has to hold them accountable. And that someone has to be you? I thought about it for a moment. Yes, it does. You realize they'll fight back. Hard. They could drag this out for years. They could. But they won't, I was certain of this. The evidence is too clear. The potential damages are too high. And most importantly, they can't afford the publicity. 2 days later, I received a call from Diana. You're not going to believe this. I just got off a conference call with Kellerman and the outside counsel. They're proposing a structured settlement for all affected employees, a company-wide audit of compensation practices, and implementation of an accurate time tracking system. No confidentiality agreement? I clarified. They're requesting limited confidentiality about the internal spreadsheets only, not about the fact of the wage violations or the settlement itself. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was enough. Justice approximated again, but closer this time. I can live with that, I decided. Within a week, the new agreement was drafted. Within 2, it was signed. Within 3, an email went out to all current and former software engineers 2 or 4 employed during the relevant period, notifying them of forthcoming back pay settlements. The company did not admit wrongdoing officially. They never do, but they paid what they owed, plus interest. They changed their practices. They acknowledged, through their actions if not their words, that what they had done was wrong. I received my check for $127,000 on a Thursday, deposited it on Friday, submitted my resignation on Monday. Some battles you win. Then you move on. Mike was fired 3 weeks after I left. I heard about it from Priya, who had become something of an informant, keeping me updated on the aftermath at TechVantage. They're saying it's a mutual separation, she texted. But everyone knows he was forced out. The overtime scandal triggered a full compliance audit. They found other issues in his department. I wasn't surprised. People who cut corners in one area rarely stop there. The company underwent a public transformation. New HR leadership, updated compensation policies, regular compliance training, external audits. All the things organizations do when they've been caught and want to show they've changed. Maybe they had. Maybe they hadn't. I no longer cared. I spent 2 months decompressing, hiking, reading, sleeping normal hours, remembering what it felt like to exist outside of work, to be a person, not just an employee. The tech industry's whisper network did its thing. Some doors closed. Companies that prized cultural fit over ethics, that wanted team players who wouldn't rock boats. I didn't mourn those lost opportunities. Other doors opened. Companies led by people who respected principle, who valued integrity, who understood that someone willing to stand up for themselves would also stand up for others. 3 months after leaving TechVantage, I accepted a position at Axiom, a smaller startup developing AI tools for supply chain management. Similar work, different culture. During my interview with the CEO, she asked about my previous employment. I see you were at TechVantage during their compliance issues, I nodded, watching her carefully. I was directly involved, yes. May I ask in what capacity? I filed the initial complaint that led to the company-wide settlement. She studied me for a long moment. That must have been difficult. It was. Would you do it again? Without hesitation, she smiled. Good. We need people who know where the lines are drawn, who aren't afraid to speak up when those lines are crossed. I started at Axiom the following week. Senior software engineer. Better pay, reasonable hours, overtime when necessary, compensated appropriately. My workspace faced west. I watched the sun set over Austin while finishing my tasks for the day. By 6, the office was usually empty. People went home to their lives, their families, their existence beyond work. On my desk, a small frame containing a sheet of paper. Not a motivational quote or corporate mission statement. Just a single line, typed and printed, 4327 591, a reminder of what was stolen. What was recovered? What was changed? No one at Axiom knew what the number meant. They never asked. But I knew. Some victories don't need to be explained. 3 years have passed since the TechVantage settlement. In tech time, that's an eternity. The company rebranded. New name, new logo, new mission statement. Same business, different packaging. They recovered from the scandal, as companies do. The market has a short memory. Axiom grew from 40 employees to over 200. I grew with it, advancing to principal engineer, then engineering director. Now I lead the teams I once belonged to, manage the budgets I once existed within. The irony isn't lost on me. Yesterday, a new hire, fresh-faced, eager, ambitious, stayed late. Past 7. Past 8. When I left at 9, he was still there, hunched over his keyboard, determined to impress. I stopped at his desk. "Kevin, right?" He looked up, startled. "Yes, sir. Just finishing this feature for tomorrow's demo. The demo will still be there in the morning. Go home. Get some rest. I just want to make sure it's perfect." I nodded, understanding his drive all too well. "I appreciate your dedication, but your time has value. Never forget that." Confusion crossed his face. He'd been conditioned to believe that sacrifice equaled commitment. That boundaries showed lack of passion. "Let me tell you a story," I said, pulling up a chair. "About my first job in tech." I told him about TechVantage. About the 60-hour weeks. About Mike. About the lawsuit. About the wider impact. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. "I never heard about that case," he finally said. "It didn't make national news. But it changed things in Austin Tech. Made companies more careful. Made workers more aware. And you're the one who filed the lawsuit? Risked your career?" "I am. Weren't you scared?" "Terrified," I admitted. But more scared of who I'd become if I accepted the exploitation. If I let them convince me my time, my labor, my dignity were worth less than they were. He nodded slowly. "I get it. Good. Now go home, Kevin. Whatever you're working on will be here tomorrow." He saved his work, shut down his computer, and packed his bag. At the door, he paused. "Thanks for telling me about what you did. Thank you for listening." After he left, I walked through the quiet office, checked that the lights were off in the conference rooms, made sure the coffee machine was turned off. Small habits from my days as the last to leave. Outside, the Austin skyline glittered against the night sky. Somewhere in those lights, TechVantage, under its new name, continued operating. Mike had landed at another company after a brief consulting stint. Life moved on, but something had changed. A precedent set, a boundary established, a message sent: your time has value, your labor has worth, your dignity matters. Simple truths, yet so easily forgotten in the pursuit of innovation, growth, profit. I got into my car and drove home. To my apartment that had become a house. To my solitude that had become a relationship. To my existence beyond work. In the morning I would return. Would lead meetings, review code, make decisions. Would be fair. Would be honest. Would remember what it felt like on both sides of the power dynamic. That's the thing about justice. It isn't just about winning a case or receiving compensation. It's about changing systems, shifting perspectives, creating ripples that become waves. Sometimes, those ripples start with a single person saying, "This isn't right." Sometimes, that person is you.